It was used with great success on the battlefields, farms, and suburban streets throughout America. It was described as driving influence behind many new advances. It saved time, labor, and money. These glowing endorsements of dichlorodiphenol trichloroethane, more commonly known as DDT, beg the question, how did a substance like that fall so far from grace? The answer lies in Rachel Carson's novel Silent Spring, a famous turning point in both public opinion and legislation for pesticides. DDT itself is an organic chloride and is also referred to as chlorinated hydrocarbon. It is made when a molecule is built on carbon atoms attached to hydrogen and chlorine. DDT was synthesized in 1874 in Switzerland, but its uses were not discovered until 1939 during World War II. After its introduction to the American public, it became very popular. Much of the excitement and support surrounding DDT can be attributed to the fact that it was so good at its job. This wonder chemical could be used agriculturally, commercially, and even in households. DDT was used with great success during wartime, cleansing soldiers of combat lice and successfully combating a typhus epidemic in Naples. Farmers across the United States utilized it to stop insects from devouring crops. It was even sprayed in suburban areas in order to get rid of the annoying mosquitoes there. Seeing a truck spewing DDT in front of your house with children playing alongside it was completely normal. DDT was applied on powders, sprays, and aerosol bombs and bought in department stores by housewives, who were delighted that only one single application controlled bed bugs for months. No moderation was exercised in the application of DDT. Before long, billions of pounds of pesticides were being sprayed in America, with 500 million pounds being added each year. As the sale and production of pesticides became a staple in the United States economy, boosting production in agricultural settings and pleasing buyers at home, the government's attitude toward the pesticide usage was far more supportive. Ignorance was shown when government-funded organizations such as the USDA registered pesticides based on evidence supplied almost completely by the manufacturers. The Public Health Department maintained that their research stated that DDT and other pesticides did no lasting damage to wildlife. Many agricultural officials believed that a biochemical war must be waged on crop-eating insects. The reality that some insects might be essential to life seemed to have escaped them, and some fanatics even believed that there should someday be a completely insect-free world. They refused to discuss a more restrictive approach to the use of chemicals. Even though the government was so adamant about the continued spraying of DDT, some scientists began to become curious as to what negative effects DDT might have. It had never been determined if DDT was harmful to human beings. All that was known was that the amount of DDT needed to kill a bug was not poisonous enough to kill humans. At the same time, some scientists believed that DDT could be stored in the body, slowly accumulating, and they realized that this bioaccumulation could drastically harm someone. On the other hand, different scientists thought that the body could only store a specific amount of DDT. Once the body hit that amount, the excess DDT was excreted from the body without any negative effects. There were some scientists who considered DDT's risks few and worthwhile, while others still had their doubts about this wonder chemical. One such opposing scientist was Rachel Carson. Rachel Carson was a marine biologist, conservationist, and author. She attended the Pennsylvania College for Women and received a master's degree in zoology at Johns Hopkins University. Carson originally started her career working for the United States Fish and Wildlife Service. Regarding DDT, she had misgivings about the popular new insecticide even before the first results from testing were known. She became even more concerned with it after seeing the devastating effects that it could have on the environment. There had been fish killings in streams all over the country caused by pesticides that entered the water. Bird populations such as the Cooper's hawk and the golden eagle showed a steady decline while pesticides were being used in areas that they lived. The osprey was a species of bird that was beginning to die out due to the DDT that weakened their eggshells. Their population dropped because the chicks would simply die before hatching. Plant species were damaged, and it was almost impossible to find animals that were free from contamination. There were even small quantities of DDT in places like Antarctica, where no direct application had been made. Carson knew that it was time for someone to speak up about the detrimental effect that DDT was having on the environment and decided to use her writing talents to do so. She had 3 aims in writing Silent Spring: creating an enduring work of literature on par with The Sea Around Us, one of her earlier works, alerting the public to the health dangers of pesticides, and forcing the U.S. government to regulate the chemical industry more stringently. Due to the importance of the project, she put in tremendous effort in researching for it. She was able to build an extensive network of correspondents and often posed questions to them. By 1958, her research files began to expand into what would become a small archive filled with letters and articles from hundreds of sources. She was able to bring together the ideas of many intelligent scientists. She also included credible scientific evidence to back up her viewpoints. By using 55 pages of reference at the end of the book, she was showing that she was not trying to present distorted information. One of the points that she presented was the connection between pesticides and cancer. She discussed the issue at length with a scientist and a toxicologist who had focused on the issue for years. Carson also states in Silent Spring that DDT was not the only problem. DDT was soon joined by a host of toxic cousins. These included lindane, chlordane, heptachlor, toxaphene, dieldrin, aldrin, and the apocalyptically named endrin, which had toxicity many times that of DDT. Carson's manuscript was almost done, and she needed a title that would catch the eye of the American public. She eventually decided on Silent Spring because she hoped to convey her fear that one day chemical pollution would silence the calls of birds around the nation. The overall thesis of Silent Spring was, all this is not to say there is no insect problem and no need of control. I am saying, rather, that control must be geared to realities, not mythical situations, and that the methods employed must be such that they do not destroy us along with the insects. Silent Spring was published on September 27, 1962. Following the publication, chemical companies around the country immediately began planning their counterattack on the book. Some of the companies decided to analyze her work line by line. The industry believed that Carson had presented a one-sided case. They claimed that she ignored the benefits that came from using pesticides, such as the decrease of insect-borne diseases and increase in food production. The chemical companies had initially hoped that the book would not alter public opinion. However, their hopes were dashed when it became obvious that the book was a turning point in people's attitude towards pesticide usage. Until the publication of the book, people had been generally unaware of the toxicity of pesticides. Now, Silent Spring had persuaded the general public that DDT and other hydrocarbon-based pesticides posed a danger to humans and nature. Within the first 2 months of the book's publication, stores had sold over 100,000 copies and it stood at number 1 on the bestseller list. Other signs indicated that the book had wide appeal. The Book of the Month Club made Silent Spring its October selection, and CBS approached the publisher about doing a segment on the book for its highly rated news show. It was discussed in countless letters, editorials, and columns in newspapers all over the nation. However, not everyone was enthused about the book. Miss Carson must be one of those peace nuts too, an angry reader wrote to the New Yorker. Another said, Miss Carson is obviously a communist. She is opposed to American business. We can live without birds, but not without business. As long as we have the H-bombs, everything is all right. A popular argument made by detractors of the book was that Carson's gender prevented her from presenting the issue in a logical manner. She was often referred to as a hysterical woman and was once dismissed as a spinster with an affinity for cats. People were accustomed to the more exciting fields of scientific knowledge as being exclusively male-dominated. Silent Spring was also on the mind of the country's politicians, especially the commander-in-chief. At an August news conference, a reporter asked President Kennedy if the USDA and Public Health Service were investigating the danger of pesticides. Kennedy assured them that they were and added, particularly since the publication of Miss Carson's book. Since the book was at the forefront of the minds of government officials, it quickly became a turning point in pesticide legislation. Congress soon adopted the National Environmental Policy Act with little opposition. The NEPA forced all government agencies to report on the environmental impact of their activities. The effects carried over to Lyndon Johnson's administration, which ignited the modern environmental movement and introduced legislation such as the Clean Air Act and the Endangered Species Act. In the summer of 1972, it was announced that most uses of DDT would be prohibited. The agricultural industry opposed the book because it was affected negatively by the ban. It was incredibly hard to find a substitute for insect control that worked as well as DDT did. The other substitutes were less efficient and more expensive, resulting in the economic growth in the industry falling significantly. The book became a positive turning point for the environment, especially for the animal populations that had previously been disappearing due to DDT. As laws were passed banning the substance, huge improvements were being made. The populations of bald eagles, falcons, ospreys, and brown pelicans had all been drastically declining. Now they were suddenly making a comeback. In a matter of years, the populations had recovered handily. While finishing Silent Spring, Carson was diagnosed with breast cancer. Not wanting everyone to believe she was trying to blame pesticides for her disease, she hid it from the public eye. On April 14, 1964, she died of a heart attack. Carson's book continued to be controversial even after her death. The large companies that depended on DDT refused to go down without a fight. Their most popular argument against her was that she was a priestess of nature with no regard for what DDT did for the human race. Even critics say today that since DDT was no longer being produced in America, malaria began to return to Africa. DDT had been a popular weapon in the battle against malaria, but with its disappearance, there was a resurgence of malaria-related deaths. Other critics today are able to find fault in Carson's presentation of the issue. She often refuses to acknowledge the benefits of DDT and ignores the fact that an inevitable decline would soon happen in America's food supply and economy if it was banned. However, the book is still praised today as well. There is no doubt that Silent Spring was a turning point for the environmental movement. No other book has drawn the public's eye to environmental issues to such a large scale before or since. It was a kickstart for the Green Revolution, which has made large steps in producing food, clothing, and shelter for billions of humans. Whether or not they agree with Silent Spring, there is an overall acceptance from all critics that the book was the main reason why there was a turning point in both pesticide legislation and in public opinion of pesticide spraying. If Silent Spring had never been published, it is safe to say that these changes would have never occurred. Thanks to Rachel Carson, we have lived over 50 years without a spring void of birdsong.